done talking.
Sir, you can't leave. You can't leave.
Please, get your hands off.
No, sir.
Get your hand off. Get your hand off.
Sir, right
Don't
now,
touch me.
you're under arrest.
I'm not under arrest.
Yes, you are. I need you to understand. I don't want to arrest
Don't touch me, man. I didn't do nothing.
I don't want to arrest you.
Arrest at this point.
I don't want to arrest
I'm not under arrest. I didn't do nothing but protect my child.
Don't want to
So
arrest
just let
you.
me go.
The scene opens not with urgency, but with intrusion. This is not a traffic stop unfolding on a public roadway, not a suspect encountered mid-crime. This is a home, private space, where authority arrives carrying assumptions rather than warrants. From the first moments, the atmosphere is already unstable, not because of what the father does, but because of how law enforcement enters a civil dispute with criminal posture. This case does not hinge on a single bad decision. It unfolds through accumulation, small procedural shortcuts, unchecked assumptions, and a persistent refusal to slow down when the facts demand it. The Bodycam captures something far more instructive than an explosive confrontation. It records how a lawful situation is gradually bent until force appears inevitable. Officers arrive following a complaint tied to a custody arrangement. On paper, this should immediately limit their role. Custody orders are enforced through family court mechanisms, not patrol discretion. Law enforcement may document, may keep the peace, may refer, but they do not compel performance of civil orders absent specific criminal elements. Yet from the moment officers cross onto the property, they behave as though compliance can be demanded on the spot. The father's first response is not evasion. He does not hide. He does not flee. He speaks. He explains. He references documentation. This is critical. He does not attempt to control the officers. He attempts to orient them. His posture is defensive in the legal sense, not the physical one. He is defending his compliance with the court order. What follows is a common but dangerous pattern. Officers hear the explanation, but they do not process it. They acknowledge pieces of it without integrating them into decision-making. The information is treated as noise rather than constraint. The father's references to dates, times, and missed obligations are not challenged. They are simply sidelined. Inside the home, the dynamic sharpens. The father lays out court papers and messages, showing a timeline that contradicts the basis of the call. The documentation establishes that the other parent failed to comply with the custody schedule. This should change everything. In a lawful system, this is the point where officers disengage, document, and leave. Instead, uncertainty sets in. You can hear it in their voices, you can see it in their body language. Officers begin consulting one another. A supervisor is contacted. This is not the confidence of lawful authority. It is the hesitation of an institution that has stepped into territory it does not fully understand. And hesitation in policing is often treated as a threat. As the officers review the material, something important happens. They begin to verbally confirm that the father has done what he was supposed to do. Reports were filed, violations were documented, procedures were followed. These acknowledgements are not whispered, they are spoken aloud, captured. On camera, the record is clear, but acknowledgement does not equal action. Here lies the central tension of this case. Law enforcement recognizes compliance, yet continues to behave as though non-compliance exists. The contradiction is never resolved. Instead, it is managed. And the tool for managing contradiction is authority. The officer's role subtly shifts. They stop acting as neutral responders and begin acting as intermediaries tasked with producing an outcome, specifically the transfer of a child. This is not a lawful goal under the circumstances. The court order dictates timing and responsibility, not officer-enforced handoffs at the parent's residence, but convenience begins to outweigh jurisdiction. The father pushes back, not physically, but legally. He asserts property boundaries. He asserts that the other parent cannot come onto the property. He references the court language governing exchanges. This is not defiance, it is clarification. Yet officers interpret this insistence as obstruction because it interferes with their emerging objective. The psychological shift is subtle but decisive. Once officers internalize an outcome, any outcome, that outcome becomes the metric by which cooperation is measured. Anyone who facilitates it is cooperative. Anyone who does not is resisting. The law becomes secondary. A supervisor arrives and reviews the documentation. Again, the same pattern repeats. The father's compliance is confirmed. The other parent's violation is acknowledged. This should end the encounter. Instead, it escalates it. The supervisor introduces a conditional threat. If the child is not handed over, enforcement will follow. This is a critical moment. There is no new information, no new legal authority. What changes is the willingness to use arrest as leverage. The law is no longer the boundary, it is the justification applied after the fact. This is where the power dynamic becomes explicit. The father is placed in an impossible position. He is told he is right, and then told that being right may not matter. He is warned that refusal to comply with an unlawful demand could result in arrest. At this point, the encounter ceases to be about custody and becomes about submission. The body cam captures the father's frustration, and it is here that viewers often misinterpret what they see. Emotion is conflated with guilt, anger is mistaken for threat, but context matters. This is a grieving parent who has followed the rules and is now being told those rules offer no protection. His frustration is not erratic, it is proportional. Officers, however, respond to emotion with control measures, space closes, commands become shorter, the conversational tone disappears. This is the beginning of physical escalation, even before any force is applied. The decision has been made internally, though not yet spoken aloud. One officer explicitly states reluctance to arrest. This statement is revealing. It suggests awareness that arrest is unjustified, but awareness does not stop the process. In fact, it often accelerates it. When officers feel morally conflicted, they tend to defer to procedure, even when procedure is being misapplied. The father continues to point back to the documentation. He repeats the same facts because they have not been addressed. This repetition is later framed as obstinance. In reality, it is the natural response to being ignored. When lawful explanations fail, repetition is the only remaining tool. Officers exchange glances. They look to one another for cues. No one wants to be the one to stop it. This is how institutional momentum works. Responsibility diffuses across the group until no single person feels accountable for the outcome. The threat of arrest becomes explicit. The language shifts from discussion to command. The father is told he cannot leave, despite being inside his own home and not under arrest at that moment. This assertion alone marks a significant constitutional breach. Detention without reasonable suspicion or probable cause is unlawful, regardless of tone. From here, the trajectory is fixed. The opening hook, the moment when hands are placed and authority becomes physical, is not a sudden explosion. It is the logical conclusion of everything that came before it. The refusal to disengage, the insistence on outcome over legality, the inability to accept correction from documentation. Each choice narrows the available exits. What makes this case especially revealing is how often officers state that they understand the father's position. Understanding does not translate into restraint. Sympathy does not produce disengagement. The system acknowledges harm while continuing to cause it. By the end of this first phase, the legal landscape is inverted. The person who followed the court order is being threatened with arrest. The person who violated it is absent and untouched. The officers know this, the camera records it, and yet the machinery continues to move forward. This is not a story about a single confrontation. It is a study in how authority, once set in motion without clear jurisdiction, resists correction. The most dangerous moments in policing are not always the loudest. Often they are the quiet ones, where everyone agrees on the facts and acts against them anyway. Once the threshold into physical enforcement is crossed, the encounter enters a different legal universe. The rules change not because the law has changed, but because momentum has. What had been a dispute over jurisdiction becomes an exercise in control. And in that shift, the original question, who violated the court order, disappears almost entirely. The first physical contact is not framed as force, it is framed as guidance, as positioning, as prevention. This is how escalation often begins, through actions small enough to be defensible in isolation, yet cumulative enough to alter the entire encounter. Hands are placed before a clear arrest is articulated. Space is constrained before detention is lawfully justified. The sequence matters because legality in policing is not only about what is done, but when and why. The father reacts immediately, not with aggression, but with protest. He asserts that he is not under arrest. He states that he has done nothing wrong. These statements are not merely emotional outbursts, they are legal assertions. He is articulating the absence of probable cause. The officers do not respond by clarifying the charge, they respond by repeating commands. This repetition is telling. When officers have a clear legal basis, they explain it. When they do not, they rely on authority itself as justification. Commands replace explanations. Volume replaces reasoning. This is not accidental. It is a learned response to uncertainty. The body cam captures officers saying they do not want to arrest him. This phrase recurs almost ritualistically. It functions as a psychological buffer. By vocalizing reluctance, officers distance themselves from the consequences of their actions. Responsibility is shifted from choice to circumstance. I don't want to becomes I have to, even when no legal necessity is articulated. At this stage, the father's continued references to the court order are no longer engaged at all. They are treated as irrelevant noise. This is a critical transition. Once force is initiated, new information stops mattering. The encounter becomes about compliance with commands, not compliance with law. The system closes ranks around the action already taken. The officer's language begins to reflect this shift. Words associated with safety and control appear, despite the absence of any credible threat. The father is not armed. He is not attempting to flee. He is not attacking. Yet, the framing moves toward officer safety, a broad and elastic concept that can justify nearly any escalation once invoked. The father's resistance is contextual and reactive. He pulls away from hands placed on him without legal justification. This movement is immediately labeled as resistance. The context that the contact itself may be unlawful is erased. This is a crucial mechanism in many use of force cases. Resistance is defined without reference to its cause. Commands escalate. Hands are ordered behind the back. The father questions why. No answer is given that ties to a specific crime. Instead, the inevitability of arrest is asserted. This is not lawful arrest procedure, it is enforcement by attrition. The message is clear: compliance will end the struggle, even if the struggle should never have begun. As the physical struggle intensifies, officers' voices harden. The earlier uncertainty disappears, replaced by procedural certainty. This is another common pattern. Once force is used, doubt becomes dangerous. Officers must believe in the necessity of their actions to continue them. The system rewards decisiveness, not reflection. The father expresses physical distress. He references injury. He asks for relief. These requests are acknowledged but subordinated. Medical needs are treated as secondary to restraint. This prioritization is revealing. It shows that control has become the primary objective, outweighing care, legality, and proportionality. The threat and eventual use of intermediate force enters the scene. The mere mention of it changes the psychological landscape. It is no longer about whether the arrest is lawful, but about how much force will be used to complete it. The father's legal arguments are rendered moot by the immediacy of physical harm. Importantly, throughout this escalation, officers continue to reference the underlying custody issue in fragmented ways. They acknowledge that it is civil. They acknowledge that the other parent violated the order. Yet none of these acknowledgements alter the trajectory. This coexistence of recognition and action exposes a fundamental flaw. Knowledge alone does not constrain power. The arrest itself is chaotic, not because the father is violent, but because the situation is incoherent. Multiple officers issue commands simultaneously. Physical positioning shifts rapidly. The father's movements are constrained, then interpreted as further resistance. This feedback loop accelerates the use of force. At no point during the physical escalation does an officer clearly articulate the crime for which the father is being arrested. This omission is not incidental. It reflects the reality that the arrest is being justified retroactively. The bodycam captures the action first. The rationale follows later. Once the father is restrained, the tone changes again. The immediate intensity subsides. Officers begin to reframe the encounter verbally. They discuss what happened in simplified terms. Movements are categorized, statements are summarized. The complexity of the earlier discussion about court orders disappears. The narrative narrows. This narrowing is essential for institutional survival. Reports must be written, supervisors must review, actions must be defended. Complexity introduces vulnerability. Simplicity protects authority. The father's role is reduced to a few descriptors: non-compliant, resistant, argumentative. The months of documented compliance vanish from the operational narrative. Medical personnel are called, but their presence does not alter the fundamental framing. The father's distress is treated as a consequence of his behavior, not as a factor in evaluating the officer's decisions. This inversion is common. Harm becomes evidence of resistance rather than a signal of excessive force. As the scene stabilizes, officers begin discussing charges in vague, tentative language. This vagueness is strategic. It allows flexibility later. Charges can be refined, reduced, or dismissed without admitting error. The immediate goal is not legal precision, it is procedural closure. The bodycam captures officers explaining the incident to one another, often in ways that subtly shift responsibility. Phrases like "he wouldn't comply" and "he kept pulling away" appear. The initiating actions, the unlawful detention, the lack of probable cause are absent from these summaries. This is how narratives are constructed to withstand scrutiny. What is striking is how the earlier acknowledgements of the father's compliance resurface only as footnotes. They are mentioned but not integrated. They do not change the outcome. This selective incorporation of facts is not malicious, it is systemic. The system is not designed to reconcile contradictions in real time. The father's emotional state by this point is markedly different. The earlier assertiveness has given way to exhaustion. His voice lowers, his arguments shorten. This is often misread as de-escalation success. In reality, it is the natural response to overwhelming power. Compliance achieved through exhaustion is not voluntary. The absence of the other parent looms large. The person who initiated the call, who allegedly sought enforcement, is not present. Her documented violations remain unaddressed. This asymmetry reveals a core truth about policing. Enforcement gravitates toward availability, not culpability. The person on scene becomes the focus, regardless of fault. The officer's continued references to procedure underscore another institutional failure. Procedure is treated as a substitute for law. Following steps becomes more important than questioning whether those steps should be taken at all. This is how wrongful arrests occur without individual malice. As time passes, the encounter is reclassified in the officer's minds. It is no longer a custody dispute gone wrong. It is an arrest scenario with resistance. This reclassification justifies everything that follows. Once categorized, the situation is processed accordingly. The father's documentation never regains relevance. It does not travel forward into the enforcement phase. It exists only as a memory, inconvenient and unresolved. This is a critical loss. Evidence that contradicts action must be excluded for the action to stand. By the end of this phase, the legal inversion is complete. The compliant party is in custody. The violating party remains free. Officers have used force to resolve a civil inconvenience, and the system has moved seamlessly from uncertainty to certainty without ever confronting its own error. This is the most dangerous aspect of the encounter. Not the physical force itself, but the ease with which it becomes normalized. Every step feels justified in the moment. Every decision seems reasonable in isolation, but taken together, they reveal a process untethered from law. Part 2 ends with the situation operationally resolved but legally unresolved. The father is restrained, officers are regrouping, reports are forming, yet the foundational questions remain unanswered. What crime was committed? What authority was exercised? And why did documented compliance fail to protect the person who relied on it? These questions do not disrupt the scene, they linger beneath it, deferred to courts, lawyers, and time. The bodycam captures the moment where law enforcement stops asking whether it should act and focuses only on how to justify having acted. The final phase of this encounter unfolds in a quieter register, but its implications are far heavier. The struggle has ended. The shouting has subsided. What remains is interpretation, how the system explains to itself what just happened, and how those explanations shape accountability. This is where the true outcome of the encounter is decided, long before any courtroom review. With the father restrained and the immediate tension diffused, officers begin the familiar process of narrative consolidation. This is not done maliciously or conspiratorially. It is procedural, habitual, and deeply ingrained. Events are reordered, compressed, and framed in ways that align with departmental logic. The question is no longer whether the arrest was justified, but how it will be described. You can hear the shift in language. Where earlier dialogue was uncertain and exploratory, it now becomes declarative. Statements harden into facts. Actions are categorized. The ambiguity that dominated the early minutes disappears, replaced by a version of events that supports the outcome already reached. This is the institutional instinct to stabilize. The father's earlier compliance, acknowledged multiple times before the arrest, does not vanish entirely. It lingers at the margins of the conversation, mentioned briefly, then set aside. It is treated as context, not as a controlling fact. This distinction matters. Context can be acknowledged without altering conclusions. Controlling facts cannot. As officers discuss the incident, their focus narrows to specific behaviors during the physical encounter. Movements are isolated, moments of tension are highlighted. The broader legal framework that preceded those moments fades from view. The unlawful detention, the lack of probable cause, the civil nature of the dispute, these elements are not actively denied, but they are no longer central. This narrowing is essential to how the system protects itself. Broad context introduces systemic questions. Narrow focus limits responsibility to individual actions within an already accepted frame. By concentrating on how the father reacted to force rather than why force was applied, the narrative becomes defensible. Medical attention is provided, but even this is framed through the lens of procedure. Care is given because it must be, not because it prompts reflection. The father's physical and emotional distress is treated as an outcome, not as evidence. This framing allows the system to acknowledge harm without interrogating its cause. What becomes increasingly clear is that no one on scene revisits the original decision to remain involved. The possibility that officers should have disengaged entirely is not meaningfully explored. Disengagement in policing culture is often perceived as failure. Staying and escalating feels safer institutionally, even when it produces worse outcomes. The custody violation that initiated the call remains unresolved. The other parent's absence is explained away by jurisdictional limits, procedural barriers, or timing. These explanations may be accurate in isolation, but their selective application is telling. Jurisdictional limits are cited to avoid acting against the absent violator, but ignored when acting against the present compliant parent. This asymmetry is one of the most damaging aspects of the encounter. It sends a clear message about how enforcement actually operates. Responsibility is not determined solely by legality, but by availability. The person who is there becomes the person acted upon, regardless of fault. As time passes, officers begin discussing the encounter in terms of policy compliance. Use of force thresholds are referenced implicitly. Resistance categories are considered. These frameworks are designed to standardize review, but they also abstract away lived reality. The father becomes a case, not a person. His grief, his documentation, his legal correctness all recede behind checkboxes. The bodycam footage itself becomes a silent participant in this process. It records everything, yet it does not intervene. It captures acknowledgements of compliance that will later be described as irrelevant. It preserves uncertainty that will later be edited out through reporting. The camera sees, but the institution interprets. This is where the gap between evidence and accountability widens. Footage alone does not compel truth. It must be contextualized honestly. Without that willingness, bodycam becomes a record of injustice rather than a remedy for it. The father's demeanor in these final moments reflects the cumulative toll of the encounter. He is no longer arguing. He is no longer insisting on being heard. This is not acceptance of wrongdoing, it is resignation. The system has demonstrated its capacity to override legality with force. Continued protest feels futile. Observers often mistake this resignation for cooperation. It is not. It is the natural response to overwhelming power. When every attempt to assert rights is met with escalation, silence becomes a survival strategy. From an institutional perspective, the encounter is effectively over. Officers prepare to clear the scene. Reports will be written, supervisors will review, each layer will rely on the narratives produced below it. This is how systemic failures persist, not through overt corruption, but through aligned incentives and normalized shortcuts. The legal questions raised by this case are significant, but they are not unique. Probable cause was never clearly established. Reasonable suspicion was stretched beyond recognition. A civil dispute was enforced through criminal means. These are not edge cases, they are recurring themes in custody-related policing. What makes this case especially instructive is how clearly the contradiction is captured. Officers repeatedly acknowledge that the father followed the court order. They recognize that the other parent violated it. Yet, they proceed to arrest the compliant party anyway. This is not ignorance, it is prioritization. The priority is not justice, but closure. The call must end. The situation must be resolved. The easiest way to achieve resolution is to act on the person present. This calculus is rarely spoken aloud, but it governs countless encounters. The long-term consequences extend far beyond this scene. Trust in law enforcement is not eroded by isolated acts of force alone. It is eroded when people learn that doing everything right does not protect them. That documentation does not matter. That legality is negotiable. For parents navigating custody disputes, the lesson is chilling. The system that promises neutrality can become an adversary without warning. The very act of insisting on one's rights can trigger escalation. This creates a perverse incentive to surrender legal protections in favor of compliance with unlawful demands. The officers involved may genuinely believe they acted reasonably. That belief is part of the problem. The system rewards adherence to procedure over adherence to law. As long as boxes are checked, deeper contradictions go unexamined. This is why accountability cannot rely solely on internal review. Internal processes are designed to preserve institutional legitimacy, not to confront foundational errors. Without external scrutiny, cases like this are absorbed, normalized, and repeated. The final moments of the footage underscore a stark reality. The encounter ends without resolving the original violation. The father's legal position remains unchanged, but his circumstances are dramatically worse. He has been injured, detained, and humiliated. The other parent faces no immediate consequence. This outcome is not an accident. It is the predictable result of a system that conflates authority with correctness. When law enforcement acts outside its jurisdiction, it does not fill gaps, it creates them. Gaps where rights disappear. Gaps where power operates without restraint. The most unsettling aspect of this case is how ordinary it is. There are no extreme outliers here, no overt malice, no explicit disregard for law, just a series of decisions made under pressure, guided by habit rather than principle. That is what makes it dangerous. As the Bodycam recording winds down, the lesson crystallizes. Perfect legal compliance is not enough when enforcement priorities are misaligned. Documentation cannot stop momentum once it begins, and without a culture that values disengagement as much as control, these outcomes will continue. This is not merely a story about one father and one arrest. It is a window into how systems fail quietly, how authority resists. Other correction. How the law becomes secondary to procedure, and how, in the space between what officers know and what they do, injustice takes root. The footage does not end with resolution. It ends with a question left unanswered by the system itself. If following the rules offers no protection, what exactly are the rules for?